used to be that I was kind of allowed access to resources because I worked with the organization, but I couldn't afford to belong. And I think now that the organization is big enough and well enough supported, I think there is a place that we all can fit in there now. But this is readily available to all of you, totally free online.
How does this relate to the World Health Organization's
You mean this one?
listing? Yeah.
There are two. And actually, I found a third one out there.
Oh, did you?
Yes, I found another one.
This is where I go back.
It might have been India, but they're similar. I think the APA one's a little bit more targeted to what we do here in the United States, where the World Health Organization is more global. They also are pretty long documents. The World Health Organization one is like 71 pages. I think American Herbal Products Association one is 30-some pages. I'm going to pass these around so you can take a look at them. And I urge you to read them. However, I work with a lot of farmers all the time. And most of them do not want to read something quite that long. But we'll talk about what we did. I also found this great little video. Now this was an Indian-made video, so some of the things is pretty backcountry. But I search out that kind of information for growers on our scale because most of us cannot afford big fancy equipment. We're looking for pretty low-tech ways to do things. So I have found that this video is quite helpful. Very good. She just got a picture of it. If you just do a YouTube search for good agricultural and collection practices, medicinal plants, it pulls right up. Okay? So why are we really pushing this if this is not required for herbs? Why even bother? There's nobody, the federal government isn't coming to any of us yet. Nobody said anything about growing ginseng and golden seal and echinacea and having gaps. Why are we doing this?
Yet? Is that the key word, yet?
Well, it's really, and I started this long ago when they first started talking about good manufacturing practices. Right now, I don't care how small a business you are making herbal products like tinctures and capsules, you are now under these laws. You must follow these laws. And these, look at that number one. A manufacturer has to be able to have positive identification on every single ingredient. So from the first day I heard about this, I got excited and I said, this is how we can provide something that they can't do from many other places. Let's be the ones that can have the positive identification. Because this is what these buyers need. Okay, so how do we provide that? So it's a way for us to give the manufacturers the products they need with the documentation that they need to meet the rules that are on them. Okay, the rules aren't on us as the growers yet, but this is our market opportunity. Again, if you're into reading and want to know the real laws, you can go to the FDA and look at the FDA current good manufacturing practices for dietary supplements. Who knows, you might find something in there that really works for you, that you can do special. To put things in English, going through that FDA page is really difficult to do. So you can go to the Natural Products Association page, and they have frequently asked questions on GMPs that are written in clear English. Like, why do you have to do this? Prevent mix-ups and errors. You know, I mean, they just put it in English. And then if you want to make products, and I know some people in this room do make products, the Bio Network, okay, we have a North Carolina Bio Network, which works through our community college system and is funded by the Biotechnology Center. And we have our division here that works so much with natural products is the one that works out of the AB Tech Enca campus, that Bio Network. And they offer these classes on good manufacturing practices for herbal products. And if you want to make products, say you've been making a tincture in your kitchen. You've been doing a wonderful job for the past 25 years. Nobody's ever gotten sick. But all of a sudden you're thinking, yeah, I might get caught doing this. I shouldn't be doing it this way. I want to be within the letter of the law. You can go and make your products at a facility such as this. And there's more and more of these being built around the country. Shared use facilities that meet all the regulations. But if the Blue Ridge Food Ventures, in order for you to use their facility to make natural products, you first have to take one of these courses. So you've heard about GAPS, you've heard the Food Modernization and Safety Act. We aren't going to cover all that, but this is exactly the kind of situation here. Now I'm hoping that this picture I stole off the internet is of a crop that's past its prime. But this is one of the things that would absolutely not be allowed. Okay, you cannot have animals in there among the plants that you're harvesting. Even though from an organic standpoint this is a really good thing, you now need to learn to do this after you've harvested your crop or far enough ahead of time to meet the manure regulations. Okay, now I'll give the handout. Margaret, you want to help me get these out? And Craig? So, a couple years ago, I said I'd write this. I thought I had it mostly done. Margaret found it in our shared file. It started in 2012 and it was like a quarter done. So you all forced me to finish up this draft. You are the very first, I finished this about 4 o'clock last night. So you are the very first to see it. So I could use feedback from you, and we might get some of that feedback as we go through today. What did I miss? So what I did was took those 2 big documents that nobody wants to read, those 72 pages, and I did what so many people asked me to do, and distilled it down into what do I absolutely positively need. So not all of the environmental good stewardship parts are in there, but a whole lot of the information is. It's going to help you meet the standards to allow Ed to buy from you, okay? And so we're going to go through this a little bit. As I said, I'm covering wild harvesters and growers. I'm seeing an increase in the number of wild harvesters that we have of all herbs because they're of our native herbs, of course, because there is an increased demand for these. So let's cover both because I think you're going to do a little bit of both. First and foremost, probably the absolute most important is positive identification. How do you get positive identification? Well, when a lot of these guidelines and such get written, and even the rules, the good manufacturing practices say you have to have positive ID, but they don't tell you how you have to have the positive ID. They let you figure this out. So when these rules were first coming on board, a lot of the small manufacturers that we had in this area thought that those GMPs were going to put them right out of business because they made the assumption that they all had to have big laboratories with HPLCs and all this big fancy equipment and a chemist online all the time, or that they were going to have to spend thousands of dollars getting analysis done. That is not the case. You don't have to have a lab. And actually, all the demand for this has now created all kinds of labs across the country, and you can get lab analysis done for much, much cheaper than you could, say, 10 years ago. But botanical identification is, for most cases, adequate. Do you just take a good botanical identification from a knowledgeable person? And so my suggestion is, if I was selling herbal products, if I was growing them, I would be making a voucher specimen for any one of my crops. It is so easy to do. Okay, all you're doing is pressing a plant. And I would make it look very much like the picture that Jennifer showed you, only I would include the roots, and I would press my plant, and then I would take photographs of that. I would probably keep the voucher in my files. Here are classes like we're going to offer. We did a series of these when we had another grant-funded project with a group of us, and Joanne McCoy taught us all how to make vouchers. I have on your handout here, there is a link for just a really easy little online, it's not a video, but it has pictures and shows you how to go about making your vouchers. Getting a botanist involved. I know some people that grow like 5 or 6 different herbs. We've got many, many, many trained, degreed botanists in this region. They'll have one of them come out for a small fee, and usually lunch or dinner. That person will help do an identification. And I know some people, what they're doing then is then going, okay, you agree that that's black cohosh, here's my voucher, and that botanist is putting a signature down saying, this one on this piece of paper is black cohosh. Some of them might not be willing to say, yes, I say you've got just black cohosh here and I'm going to vouch for everything that you're producing, but they all will say that yes, this one here on this voucher paper is black cohosh. So you can work with a botanist on it. Use your own good guides. Right now, probably the best guide we have out there is the newest Peterson Field Guide, and I've got that written down here, to medicinal plants and herbs of Eastern and Central North America. It's the 3rd edition, was just published last year, and that's by Stephen Foster and James Duke. Great guide, and matter of fact, many, many of the buyers that buy from wild harvesters insist that you use that book and often have that book available for sale at their buying stations. It's one of the best. So again, there's different ways to do this. Now you might run into a buyer that indeed wants a laboratory analysis to look for specific chemical profiles or specific marker compounds. But then that's between you and the buyer. You have yes?
We can do that.
Amanda, just really briefly, do you want to say what your laboratory is and what the services you provide and where you are?
We're a nonprofit laboratory, and we work really closely with the Bio Network. We can help facilitate either getting into good manufacturing practices of production at Rural Adventures, and we can also do some of the chemical analysis if that's what your buyers do. I'm sorry, this is U.S. Botanical Safety Lab, and we're under Bay Creek Institute. We also work closely with the germ farm.
So sometimes this is something you can work out with the buyer, okay? Because sometimes the amount of material you have to sell, the testing would actually be worth almost as much as that amount of material. So sometimes you need to work with your buyer if you're just developing a relationship with the buyer, that this is something you're going to want to grow for this buyer in the future. They will often pick up the costs of doing that in the beginning. To help move that relationship along, because all of our buyers want to develop good, strong domestic sources of these herbs. We don't have enough of them at the present time. So they're doing some things now that they didn't before. And also, years ago, when we first started all this, and we started the Natural Products Laboratory at the Bio Network, it was because I was seeing some buyers, you'd grow an herb, you'd give a sample to the buyer would have it tested and would come back to you and go, well, you know, this isn't really the quality I want. And they'd show you an HPLC, you know, and see, this is the reason why. And I think a lot of times it was made up, okay? It was a way to get the price down. And I saw this for sure when a grower I know got the exact same HPLC diagram 2 different years in a row. And it's like, they will not be exactly the same, including the date that was in real tiny print down at the bottom. Yep.
What was the question?
The prices,
Okay,
yeah,
here's
talk
some-
loud enough to get on film.
Well, one thing I'll say about prices is that if you all get together and you need similar tests, I can help prices go down. But just to give you an idea, chemical identification is usually $2.95 a sample. Taxonomic ID with the certificate of analysis from a botanist is $180. Heavy metals are $2.95. Pesticides are $3.50. So
They're pricey, so if you have 10 pounds of herb, it's going to be hard to justify this. But she's bringing up a really good point, that if you don't work in laboratories, it's hard to understand until somebody explains it to you. If you bring in one sample of black cohosh, and she's got to gear up all her equipment and make all of her solutions to run one sample, it's going to be really expensive. But if all of you growing black cohosh can get together so that she gets 20 samples at once, she can reduce the price, because she's got to do the same preparation to run those 20 samples as she does one. That's the big point. Our hop growers have learned the same thing. They send in one sample on their own and it costs a fortune, but if they work together, the costs come way down.
and we all try to help coordinate that. Jen Flynn, that does the Blue Ridge National Seal, and Sarah Shoger and her lab personnel. If you need assistance getting that coordinated with people, we're trying to work with people.
And a lot of growers, smaller growers in particular, feel very comfortable as they build a relationship with their buyers to let that testing be done at the lab. Again, it's building that trust. I have one grower that we have long conversations a couple times a year, and he trusts all of his buyers on all crops but one. And he has one crop that whenever he sends that off to his buyer, he sends a sample off to another lab too. And it's just for some reason, that's one. They don't always come up with the same answers, and it's something that really affects the price that's paid for his herb. So some of this is just getting experience. Okay, so we need positive identification. This is probably the most important point. The second most, and these two are pretty close, it has to be clean, and it has to just be the species on the label. When I first started with a project called the Medicinal Herbs for Commerce Project, that Ed was one of the buyers on that project, one of the crops that we grew was dandelion. And we grew this at the research station up in Laurel Springs. And it was just the hardest time, and milk thistle. So we're growing dandelion and milk thistle. First of all, the research station staff thought we were crazy. That it's like, here's this dandelion all in this field, just growing in the grass, and then Janine is paying for seed and sowing it out in neat little rows, and then I'm telling them they have to weed it. And here I'm trying to tell them that no, if you get that little bit of plantain into my dandelion, you've contaminated it. And they're like, but I thought plantain was a medicinal herb too. And I said, it is, but you can't have the two together. And so you all know this stuff, but just think about it. Most people don't understand that until you really stop and think about it. It has to just be that single species. And this gets real confusing when you're dealing with roots. So if you don't keep your product, your herb growing in the field properly weeded, when you go through to harvest, unless it has a really distinctive root and you're real experienced with it, sometimes it can be really hard to separate one from the other. Now, some of our buyers are able to go that extra step. And this, again, is working with your buyers. Some of our buyers can work with that inexperience on your part and handle it. But again, this is why
We don't want to.
I gather that Sherry's the one that does some of this part. So it has to be clean. This is where you also make sure that you're getting rid of those pieces of plastic, those little bits of rock, metal. It's amazing how much metal is in our soil, and sometimes really cool arrowheads. Did you have a question?
Yeah, are you going to talk about washing?
Yes. Yep. First, one step at a time. Yeah, we're going to definitely talk about washing. Think about pathogens. Okay, we've got to keep things clean. You've already heard about the hand washing stuff. Again, it's changing our awareness. Because I have farmers say, why do I need to wash my hands? I'm playing in the dirt. But you all have seen enough now. You know how very little E. coli it takes to harm certain people. Again, we're usually not talking about folks like us. Because you're like me, you live on a farm. I handle manure every day of my life. I'm not going to be affected by stuff. What I worry about are people on chemotherapy. I worry about this generation of children that are being raised in completely sanitized environments. I don't think they have the robust immune systems that we have, but I certainly don't want to make them sick. Okay, so we need to think about those other people, all right? We can dust off that dandelion root and chew on it, but not everybody could handle that. We want to harvest our plants to protect the integrity of the crop and to maintain cleanliness during the harvest and post-harvest handling. This has been an area that's taken a lot of retraining or just thinking about. I'd say most places that I have worked rarely, if ever, washed their harvest buckets. We just didn't. We didn't think anything about setting our harvest bucket on the ground and then setting it inside another harvest bucket. And now we all go, duh. You know, why weren't we thinking about this? A practice that I've seen some vegetable growers do now, because it's hard to change something you've done for a really long time, is I know some people now that keep rolls of plastic bags, those thin plastic bags. They're adequate to line their buckets if they forgot. Okay, you're like out there, something's ready to harvest. I didn't wash that bucket. You've got something there. Plan ahead as we learn to change the way we do things. Use the appropriate tools and think about washing your tools and equipment. If you just used that tractor to be out there around the manure or spreading manure-based compost, clean it off before you go into your herbs that you're going to harvest. Think about what did you last use that pitchfork or shovel for? I mean, these are things, if it's not covered in mud, how many of us wash off our shovel? Yes?
You can talk about washing tools in between harvesting different herbs as well. Like, is that something that would be within a food safety plan?
It's not specifically, but it might be something to think of, and you make me think of an email I just got last night. And I got an email from a woman last night that was harvesting her ramps that are all growing in very tightly among all her mayapple. And she got to thinking about it, and she said, so I know the roots on that mayapple are toxic. Could that get on the outside of my ramp? Well, now, if the ramps had a hard protective coating on them, you know, I might not be so concerned, but I'm like, well, really? I have no idea how much, if anything, from that mayapple root goes into the soil. And I also know that that ramp bulb is very tender and wet and porous, and if those two are right against it, I have no clue. And I just had to tell her that. And she goes, well, I guess I shouldn't take the risk. And I said, probably not. So she went and took those ramps and hopefully replanted them. Okay? But you know, there's some things we don't know, and how much could transfer from one to the other, we don't know. But I think we should all err on the side of caution until we have the research to say otherwise. I'll get you and then you.
When you're talking about washing, is it water? Is it bleach solution?
We'll talk about washing
Okay.
in a little bit. We'll show some pictures and talk about that in particular. Yes, Charles?
Generally, general practice, or organic practice, requires that you wash between each harvest of each
Mhm.
separate item, because you want no cross-contamination. And if you have a plan and state that you do it, and you follow that reasonably and document it on an ongoing basis,
Mhm.
then it's not an issue. It's like you're saying, it's like, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do, and whenever you see it's not being done, you stop it and say, "Wait,
Right.
I have to go to my plan."
And it gets a little more complicated with a lot of the herbs on our small scale, because oftentimes you've just got a little bit of it here and then a little bit of it there. So it does take some forethought. Good point. Yes, sir?
Where I used to work, if we were going from similar crop to similar crop,
Mhm.
they had us clean our tools to prevent spread of disease.
Good point too. So yeah, it's also for, that's to prevent, not only keep your product safe for consumers, but to protect it from one crop to the next. Very good point. Equipment, tools, and keeping the species separated. So being very careful. This doesn't happen so much when you're gathering flowers or you're collecting foliage, but when you're doing roots, if you were out there, say, in our Chinese herb gardens, where we might have 6 different species growing in an area that's about the area of these 4 tables, you might be out there harvesting 4 or 5 of them. Do you really know which is which? Maybe some of you do, but there's some of those, I haven't worked with those Chinese herbs long enough. It could vary, and we have had that happen, where when the tag has fallen out and we've just had to say, we have to throw it away because none of us can say with 100% certainty that that was that root. Okay. There we go. There's the washing. And this is where practices are changing. When I first started working with herbs, you tried not to overwash your herbs because you were going to wash out all the good stuff. Ginseng is still different, and I'm not going to say which buyer it was, but this season I was with a buyer and I watched him get in some fresh ginseng, and as we were standing there, it had been cleaned, but as we were standing there, he was there rubbing the dirt into the rings. Because that does make ginseng, if those rings are nicely accented, it does make that more valuable. Ginseng, of course, is the exception to almost every single rule that we talk about. So when you wash, the most important thing that I see being violated in our area is that we're not using really clean water. A lot of people are going ahead and pulling things out of rivers and streams and ponds. Well, unless you've had that water source tested, and it tests as being safe for human consumption, why would you think it would be okay to wash your herbs with, that then get dried and we go from there? So it needs to be good quality water. It needs to be safe. It should be tested. Mhm.
Good enough for a field rinse and then a secondary rinse when you return.
I don't know. Ed, what do you think about that?
I said good enough for a field rinse, so you're not carrying the mud back all over the harvest, but then you do a secondary rinse when you return.
With the approved one.
The approved one.
Sure. Yeah, that's okay.
I still wouldn't want to use water that I knew was could possibly have some
Right.
really bad. Yeah.
That, can I say something about that?
Of course you can.
That will not pass USDA inspection.
Okay.
So
It's not
even
approved water.
that initial rinse has to be,
Okay.
Every time with water, with the FSMA rule, don't need to jump in because I know the buyer's the one that's going to be the driving. But to get a certification, anytime water touches the edible part of any product, whether it be an herb or whatever, it has to be potable water. You can no longer use, as of January 1, you can no longer use any chlorine for washing anything that touches edible that's not food safety. I mean, food grade. Food grade. Like chlorine, a lot of times the Clorox, will have smells in it and different things. That's what they're trying to avoid.
And I think, isn't Clorox the only company that has the brand Clorox?
Yes.
Is the only one with a food grade
Grade.
label?
Yes.
As I understand it, you have to have the water certified so that and tested for biological contaminants.
Yeah.
And we have to do it for organic stuff every year.
Mhm.
And that it's not there. Anything that we use for processing, there are no biological contaminants, is that correct?
Correct.
And most of us, those water sources are often, that we're now using for this produce is also the water source that we're consuming. So I'm like, that's just common sense to do that for your family anyway. Let me get Beverly and then I'll get Camille.
Okay, I missed a couple words that you were saying as of January 1st of 2015. FSMA says that you have to, and that was, it dropped out, I didn't hear you.
You have to use food grade chlorine.
Okay.
If
so
you're
just
using
the
chlorine, because a lot of us were getting cheap chlorine when we were, even with our equipment, we were sterilizing, but if it comes in contact with an edible product, you know, like, I mean, you and I know common sense, we're gonna wash off the dirt in the creek before we go back to the house to do the final washing. A lot of us have done that, but now with FSMA and, you know, Primus, you might can get by with a USDA audit if you don't put it in your plan and they don't see you doing it. But, you know, I'm being straightforward, honest. You'll have to find out that I'm like that. But, you know, you've got to, that's an automatic failure if you use non-food grade chlorine for a certification. Now, for good agriculture practices, I think what you're talking about, it is great. You know, I mean, I don't have a problem with pre-washing, you know, as long as, but I would still have my stream tested. Because if you got high E. coli, you're gonna be pulling that. You know, if you're testing your stream once a year, you know, 3 times a year is what's required for certification.
So if you're wild crafting, you can't really do that, and then if you're, water, as we know, it's flowing, it's changing constantly anyway, so my question would
Well,
be,
and wild crafting is a different, it's a different ball game. You're not certifying with wild crafting, so you're okay.
So
You're okay.
Are it better to haul your water in though, or to bring this chlorine and fill a bucket?
I would do just like you're doing, just like Ed was saying. If you're a wild crafter, and I'm a wild crafter, okay? You know, and you know, I wash daily. I don't take water with me.
And then come back.
And then I come back. I do is the least amount of injury. I'm talking too much about it. Least
No,
amount
this
of
is
injury as
important.
possible when you're wild crafting. You know, that way you're getting that initial dirt off of there, and you come back and use potable type water. And then if you let your buyer, the buyer that I sell in Oregon for some of my stuff, he knows the process I go through, and I get a premium for my product.
Okay, we had Camille and then Charles. Camille, did you get?
I'm being forced to use county water right now. You know, I'm just closing on
Sure.
my farm. God only knows when at this point. But the bank lost my money, long story. But with county water, do we still have to worry about having it tested? Or are we to assume it's okay?
That's a good question. If you
I
use
can answer
this-
that exactly what is the requirements. I've gone through the certificate. You have to have, all you got to do is contact the county. You have to have a sheet in your plan that shows they passed the E. coli, the generic. It is very important right now to know which test, and the labs can verify that. It has to be generic E. coli. That's the indicator species, not other E. coli. That's just a generic E. coli test. It's because you need to tell the lab what you need. You know, and you'll normally get the sheet, and you'll be surprised at what it comes back. Okay, but you know, the generic E. coli will be okay. But you know, that's all you have to have. You know, put it in your plan, and I would do that anyway. If I was a farmer, I would get me a sheet from the county. I want to know what my water is. You know, that way you know. If you're a well, you know, you have to have your water tested for generic E. coli. A lot of times, I had spring water on my other farm. When I had my farm, I did not want to deal with the government regs, so I washed everything somewhere else. So I had
So, and this is,
my
we-
buyer didn't like spring
this
water.
is why I brought Margaret brought the people we brought together for this, because we don't have all the answers
Yes.
on gaps for medicinal herbs, but we can learn by what's already going on with produce, because we know that this is coming down the pipe.
And I do have some culinary folks that are going through that. Lettuce is another one. If you'll follow the lettuce and the greens industry.
Leafy greens.
And use some of those practices, that's gonna help us a little bit. You know what I'm saying with that?
Okay, let me get Wells first.
About the well, I'm about to have one installed, and the county is going to do the initial water test.
That will not work.
That won't work, so I need to go and have a
It has
specific
to, for gap,
for gap.
it has to, you have to have, if the county's willing to do a generic E. coli, you've got to have that.
So I could ask them perhaps to do that, and then that would stand for, how long would that test stand?
A year.
A year.
Okay.
You have to do it every year for a well, once a year.
Once a year.
And it has to be 60 days prior to beginning of harvest.
Now, are you in Henderson or Buncombe there?
Well, the well will be in Henderson County.
And so they will, if you have a new, properly done well, they will, I
They will
believe,
test that.
they will test it
That's
every
part of-
year.
Yeah, that's.
The first
every
time.
year, oh.
But you
But
should-
I would need to specify the generic E. coli,
Yeah.
because they probably will only test for,
It's just a general spectrum, I think is what it is. But,
Okay.
you know, and a lot of them, the Henderson County will actually test generic E. coli.
and they will then, okay.
Yeah, they will. And you can run it every other year after that, then you can run it through them for a fee.
Okay.
$75 in most counties.
Yeah, and then there's James and James is a lab in Henderson County. That's who I use on my farm because my well is very old and doesn't pass the current capping standards and all of that. Yes, Nancy?
Just real quick, what about metal roof water collection systems? I know birds poop on roofs, so you probably have a problem with this.
You want me to answer it?
Go ahead.
Because I've already dealt with it.
I mean, yeah,
I've already dealt with it. You have to have, it's just the same as a pond, okay? You have to have 3 tests for well, any surface, that's considered a surface water use, because if a lot of cisterns that are being used out there, and there's some flocculants we can utilize that will pass as well. If you don't pass the generic E. coli test, you can mitigate that issue. Easy with a cistern or water collection. To pass inspection, you don't have to have that, but if you're going to get an inspection or certification, 3 times. 60 days, within the 60 days to beginning of harvest, so if you're going to harvest an herb at a certain time, the test has to show that. Then 1 time during harvest, and then at the end. That's all you have to do.
So remember, these rules aren't enforced on you now.
But they're
this
personal conscience.
Exactly. That's exactly
That's
right.
what
These
we're
are
trying to say.
things that none of us thought about 10, 15 years ago.
And
you know?
it makes you feel good that you got a good, clean product that's going. It's like if you're a wildcrafter, you want that dirt off there. You don't want to bring that into your home. Just finding those good practices that we're following.
Let's do here first.
You're talking about water that you're using for cleaning the product, not irrigating.
Right.
Right.
No, it's all water. Now, with FSMA rules, a year ago I would have said that. I mean, I deal with it every day. I didn't mean to jump in on that.
You can go right ahead.
At any point during harvest of any crop that's going to be eaten, fresh or encapsulated or whatever, it has to, all time periods that it has any contact with the water, it has to meet those standards.
Is a mushroom in that same category?
Yes. Yes.
So
During
if
that-
I'm irrigating from the French Broad River, where does that put me?
If you're irrigating from the French Broad River, you have 3 tests. You have tests within 60 days, you have tests during harvest, during that time period, and tests at the end on record.
So you're not saying that that's water that I would necessarily dip out of that river and drink, but it is water that's going to pass tests for common E. coli.
Generic E. coli under a certain parts per million, and they're fighting over that right now. And the reason why I know is because I actually have questions every week with my growers.
Okay,
on that.
so that's something then I'm going to want to talk with you and probably Ed about. I have here drinking water quality. I can probably
You can reduce that.
Okay, good point.
Definitely.
So somebody, Margaret, make a mark on there, a star on that one. Okay.
Yeah, it has to pass that parts per million of generic E. coli. to meet certification. So we can use for washing, for those kinds of things. Now, if you're going into processing, is a little bit different. If you're going to use that water for making tinctures or whatever, it's according
That's
to what
different.
temperature comes into play. That's good manufacturing practices. We're talking about good agricultural practices for you as a grower, okay?
Okay, yes, ma'am.
You
questions,
agree, Ed?
please. The first is, when I'm talking about washing, delicate things like violet flowers, and I'm making an herbal oil, water and oil are the enemy.
And some of these you don't wash.
Okay, so we can't, there are delicate aerial
Right.
parts can be,
And there are some things that you can do when you're growing to prevent having to wash. This is one of the cases where maybe using a plastic mulch or an organic mulch that prevents soil splash up will allow you to grow the upper part of the plant, the flowers or the leaves that are very delicate, in a way that you do not have to wash.
thank you.
Okay?
The second question
And-
was about bleach, chlorine. I cannot, I'm highly allergic to it, and I can't use it, and I don't use it in my home, so I use hydrogen peroxide, vinegar, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Are there other, okay,
Yeah, to answer that question,
Yes.
there's a lot of other products that will pass. If there's for herb growers particularly, or for lettuce growers, if there's some issue, as long as you can have a specialist like Janine prove, like, we don't wash violets. So, if your certifier says, well, I'm not going to pass you because you're not using potable water with your violets, all you have to do is in your plan, your food safety plan, say, I'm allergic to chlorine. I cannot use chlorine if it's required, so I'm going to use hydrogen peroxide.
and that's, where do I find these acceptable others?
Anything that is on the list for, on the FDA site, and I can get that to you as well, just email me, that is, they're sanitizers. So it's all it is.
Approved sanitizers.
Bruce, give me 1 minute, Beverly, because that brings up 2 points that I wanted to mention to you. The one is, keep in mind that there's certain products that we are using to be basically pesticides or fungicides or cleaning things. We have to be careful about what we mix up in our own kitchen. Okay, where there's that fine line between what is approved. A lot of us make up our own little pesticide sprays. Even doing it in your home garden, that's probably not really legal. But if you're doing something to sell, that is not legal. Okay, the other point is, and we just ran into this past week, Margaret got a call from an extension agent who had a grower whose mushrooms were sitting in a restaurant, and an inspector came in and said, you can't sell those mushrooms because they aren't labeled and haven't been inspected. So that agent came through to us. I'm like, that's a bunch of hooey, but I called NCDA to double check. And I called the specialist, and he immediately goes, that was a county health inspector, wasn't it? And it was a case of the inspector not knowing the rules, that you don't have to have those mushrooms graded. Grading is voluntary, and then there's inspections that could take place. But then, so if you know rules, my point was, if you know rules to be a certain way, don't trust that if somebody comes out and says, that's wrong, you have to change that, that's not going to pass. If you know it's not right, ask those questions. Because sometimes we've got new inspectors. We've had organic inspectors that have interpreted the organic rules that I have had to take it all the way to DC to show that they were not interpreting the rules right. And I'm not blaming anyone. They're not written in an easy to understand way. Did you have a comment, Margaret?
I just wanted to add another thing about this example of the mushroom grower. In this case, it was the mushrooms were sitting in a basket in a restaurant kitchen. So what could have helped is if that grower had put their label on there or had packaged them in a way so they're not sitting out. They might not have even noticed that there was a basket, but that looked suspicious.
So it
And
should have had
therefore,
Smith
we lost that
produce
sale.
shiitake mushrooms on it.
So just that we can do that with your plan, if you have your food safety plan or your, what's it called now, manual, food safety manual and your proper labeling, that can help you to avoid those situations.
Okay, we get Beverly and then Pam.
wanted to respond to your question about sanitizers. My partner, Carol Lawson, is allergic to chlorine also. We use, it's an ammonia derivative product called Quats. It's been approved by the Food and Drug Administration that's on your list. And you can get it from, if you check with your, it's the FDA inspector for your region, which would be Renee Pierce. And she can give you the list. She does the manufacturing component. Like we do it with ramps, where we manufacture products out of ramps. And so we can use that in the kitchen. So I go in with a crew that are working. We sanitize everything with bleach.
And sanitizers are different for GMP.
Right.
As
But it,
GAP, they're different.
it is different, but it's one of the products that you can use that she has the least allergies, least reaction to. And so I know, I'm talking about something different. We also are harvesting on, the growers are harvesting on site and selling to us, and we are growers. So we're using the same product, and the process we do is, I'm not allergic to bleach. So I go in with the team and clean everything up. 24 hours later, she can come in and use the clots, and they don't interact as long as what we cleaned is dry. If you put ammonia or the ammonia derivative with chlorine bleach, you get chlorine gas and dye.
Yeah.
Okay? So you have to be very conscious, and we lock those bleach bottles away. They're marked, and we close them up and closet them. And we do the same thing on when the people go out to harvest and they're cleaning the containers that they're going to put the ramps in. So we do it from literally the planting or the field all the way through.
It becomes an economic factor.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's a part of it too.
Because some things are very expensive.
But a point I want to make too is a lot of us are working with washing and drying and handling equipment that we've had for a very, very long time. And right now, that's probably still okay. You know, just be more conscious. But if I were a new grower, as I design things, everything should be totally washable.
So, my question
Yeah, we will soon.
was about the distinction between cleaning equipment and cleaning
Different products.
herbs. Yeah, so I just want some clarification about that in regard to gaps and also what buyers.
So if I'm using a Clorox product I want to clean out my root washer, my cement mixer, can I just use cheap bleach? Or because even after it's dried, it's going to touch my roots, I have to use food grade?
Back up. There's cleaning and there's sanitizing. Okay?
You use the word
Cleaning is when we're getting the dirt off, like at the creek. Okay, that's cleaning. Then there's what's called sanitizing. If it's the final container, you're going to use that, product or that crop that's going to market or going to the next chain up. Okay, that has to be sanitized.
If you have basil, and you're going to put the basil in clamshell has to be sanitized.
Absolutely. Good example. Good example. Great example. So, my point is, of all the places you sanitize in that food chain, or however you're processing that product, whatever herb it is, has to be food grade.
Okay, so
Whether it be,
look at that picture right there with the roots. That's a screen. That's how I clean roots.
That's
So
how I do mine.
When I take those roots off, I'm supposed to sterilize, sanitize, what?
you clean it first to get the dirt off. And that's what the inspector's going to look at, because even though you've got dirt and we think we can spray Clorox on there, it doesn't always penetrate as deep as you need it. So you clean the dirt off first, then you sanitize with a food-grade chlorine, which is cheaper for equipment a lot of times. I use on my screen alcohol, rubbing alcohol, because I don't want it to rust. And it's just a Craig thing. So we all choose what our cost factors are, but then you will sanitize that cement mixer when you're done before you use it the next time. It has to be sanitized because that product is being touched before it goes. Blackberries, we put them right in the clamshells. So the clamshells, anytime that surface is being touched by an edible product now to be certified, has to be sanitized with something. Did that answer it?
Yes.
Well, except that you use the word sterilize.
Same thing as sanitized.
Sterilize takes.
In the grower's perspective.
Right.
Do you know if sulfur dioxide is one of those that can be used?
It is for some of the dried stuff. I'm not sure for fresh product. We'd have to look at that and see. I really
For
don't
your equipment,
remember.
perhaps.
You know, huh?
For the equipment, perhaps.
I'm sure it would be fine for the equipment.
So we're gonna finish up the washing part. We're doing so much of the Q&A now. We're gonna just go off our schedule. So we're gonna finish washing.
Sorry.
And that's fine. This is exactly what I was hoping was gonna happen. We'll finish up washing, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and finish this, and we'll be sure to leave an hour for Ed, okay? But I want you to know that cement mixer, when we went to buy it, we very specifically went with the plastic drum. Because thinking we need to wash it. What is going to be the easiest thing and have the least amount of crevices to hold on to dirt? So start thinking along those lines. This is a very large manufacturer's washing facility out of the Pacific Northwest. At the time we took this picture in 2006, we went, ooh, that's cool. I now look at that and go, oh my God. No. They can still use this right now. They probably still are. However, on this same farm, there was a facility under shelter. Okay, that makes it better already. But it still had a whole lot of wood. That bare wood greatly concerns me. Because what happens if one of your crops gets tested? So you do your echinacea, you get it all washed, you send a sample to Ed, and it comes back with salmonella or listeria. All right, of course you're going to throw that crop out. But how are you going to clean this up? You remember that cantaloupe case we had a while back in North Carolina that had listeria? I talked to some of the people that were involved in working that case, and they said that listeria was everywhere in that packing house. So that whole packing house, now it was designed to be an appropriate packing house, so they were able to wash everything down with power washers with sanitizers in them. But for most of us, with the way we handle our herbs, how would we ever clean them? And that has me right now, we'll talk about dryers. I look at all our dryers and go, dang, how would we ever clean these? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a break now for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back in and continue. Is this the stuff you all need?
Yes.
Okay, and I love the sharing of experiences going on. Great. Yes,
I
Andy?
have a comment about the washers,
Uh-huh.
about the YouTube videos. So I